What's up, Steve? Good to see you, man. Thanks
Hey,
for
hey.
uh, thanks for
Yeah.
joining me. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Um, before we start, I just want to mention something to you, or I guess maybe remind you of something. I'm not sure how but well, first of all, let me just say, let me just introduce you briefly. We can talk, a little more about that in a minute. But
Okay.
just Stephen Welliever, he's got a background in education, and he's got an extensive knowledge of Soviet history, Russian history, and the Russian Revolution, and how what's happening in America right now is basically using the playbook of the Bolsheviks, of right. You can get into that and start with that in a little while. But I just wanted to mention something real quick. When I first made my when I made my first YouTube video, and this was like in I don't know. I think I posted it sometime in the fall of 2019, right? And as far as I'm concerned, like that should have been the first clue that like I was like really worried about something, because I'll be honest with you, right? I had no interest in I wasn't really on social media much. I had no interest in making a YouTube channel. I had no like that was like the last thing I was interested in. But so that should have been like for anybody who knew me, that should have been the first clue. Like, wow, dude, like this guy must be worried about something. He's trying to he's making a YouTube channel, right? And he's trying to
Yeah.
put information out. So whatever. But the thing that I thought was really cool it wasn't too long after that. I mean, I was on Twitter, and because I was talking about the school stuff, and because we kind of crossed paths, because we were in that similar Twitter space, Twitter neighborhood type of thing, sharing information and things like that. And you had reached out to me not long after I made my first video, and you were really encouraging, man. I always appreciated that, because like I said, I had no interest in making whatever YouTube videos or anything else like that, right? And it's not easy for pretty much for anybody, but for especially for anybody that doesn't have much of an interest in doing it. But you were like I said, I really appreciated when you reached out, and you said, hey, I appreciate your videos and stuff like that, and that was cool. And then not long after that, I think we touched base on a Zoom video. And so this is going back, like I said, this is going back to fall 2019, and we've been in pretty much regular contact since then. I'm happy to be able to call you a friend now, and it's amazing to me. I mean, obviously, I knew you had background in education and stuff like that, but what I think what people are going to find out, if they don't already know, from listening to you, is like, as far as I'm concerned, like you literally are like one of the only people who has this combination of backgrounds that can really understand what's happening in our country right now, in terms of your background in education, your background in understanding communism, and how that's being put into play in our country. So anyway, like I said, I just want to touch base on that and just mention to you that was cool, man, and it was encouraging, and that goes a long way, and it's helped out. So yeah, dude, if you want to just maybe give a little bit of background in terms of your the education background that you have, or the background in education, I should say, and then also related to the communism in the Soviet Union.
Sure. So, yeah, I had about a 15 or so year career in education. I was a science teacher, mostly biology, chemistry, Sometimes I'd teach physics, and sometimes mathematics courses too that went along with that, algebra and such. So I don't really have any kind of a history background at all.
Okay.
I probably haven't taken a history, probably took a history class in high school that I slept through.
Yeah.
And that's about wraps it up as far as history knowledge goes. But, you know, I was run out of the profession when all this kind of stuff started, you know, taking place. It's been almost a decade now, when I kind of wrote off my career because of how it had been taken over and corrupted.
Okay.
And yeah, but I do have family roots in Ukraine and Russia, and sort of the family stories that I grew up, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and people started being more free to talk about things, or felt like kind of a burden had been lifted and they could start talking about things again. That kind of stuck in the back of my head. And then when all this stuff started taking place, I started noticing some patterns that looked familiar. And it only took scratching the surface of opening up some and doing a little bit of research and seeing like, oh my gosh, this is an exact repeat of the playbook that was used 100 years ago, and almost on an exact 100-year delay time frame.
Yeah. And
So
you say playbook, and that's and just like I said, having followed your posts and your, you know, the information you've been putting out for years now. I mean, it's amazing how accurate you have been and been able to describe what's going on and kind of what's coming next and those types of things. So I think and I know I just think the word playbook is very important for people to know right off the bat that because what's happening is really being taken right out of what's happened in the past. But yeah, go
right.
ahead, man.
And having a biology background, you know, people think of genetic replication and things evolving over time. So that's kind of the framework I used for this, is not genetic replication, but mimetic replication. How replicable units of replicable behavior could be repeated, you
Okay,
know, over time.
sure.
And you might mutate and change a little bit, but how they're being replicated and what their original source was, that's kind of what I've been focusing on,
Okay,
and how I think
yeah,
and how I research.
right on, right on. So I mean, what do you think is the best place to start in terms of?
Well, let's open the door to the time machine.
Let's
Let's
go.
pop that thing open. Let's set the dial back about 100 years,
Oh my
and
God, dude.
let's take off from there. So
Right
I'm
on.
gonna set the dial on the time machine. I don't know what you call it here. I'm gonna set it back to about 1914.
Okay.
So we're gonna go back a little about 110 years. And that takes us to just a couple years before the Bolshevik Revolution. The October Revolution was in late 1917. And
Okay.
so this kind of takes us to the warm up to that.
Sure.
And the equivalent of that you could think of into Obama's second term.
Gotcha.
You know, that's kind of the equivalent 100 year later time frame.
All right.
So we're transported back to 1914 now, and let's see what Lennon's up to. He is occasionally I might pull a piece of paper over here
Oh,
and read a quote
whatever
off
you got to
of it
do
or
for
something.
sure.
Yeah. So that's when we start hearing this talk about Russian privilege. Kind of same
Okay.
thing as white privilege in modern times, only this is back about 100 years earlier. And what Lenin says at that time was that we proletarians declare in advance that we are opposed to Great Russian privilege. Great Russian is the name for the Russian ethnic group.
Okay.
They always call it Great Russian back then.
All right.
So we are opposed to great Russian privileges, and this is what guides our entire propaganda and agitation. So even right before the revolution, right in the warm up to that, he comes out and says, like, we're obsessed with Russian privilege, basically.
Right.
And that's, you know, we can all remember back about a decade when that's all you were hearing about. How everything, no matter how ridiculous it was white privilege.
Right. That
You know,
correlates right on to the white
right,
privilege framework.
right. And this is what guides our entire propaganda and agitation. That's what he says in 1914. And by the time the revolution is completed and the Bolsheviks take over at the 12th Party Congress, just to follow up on the privilege thing,
Sure.
Lenin was kind of having some strokes and wasn't doing well at that point. But Stalin says that due to the former privileged position of the great Russians, so he brings up the privilege thing again.
Sure.
And then he says the first immediate task of our party is vigorously to combat the survivals of great Russian chauvinism. Great Russian chauvinism is the equivalent of white supremacy culture or white supremacy that's you've heard about the last 10 years.
And I think it's important for people to understand when they hear, for those who don't already know, right? But when they hear about this concept of white supremacy or a white supremacist society, they're basically talking about the principles and the values and the ideals of American society. That's really what they're talking about, and similar or basically almost exactly to what you're saying, Steve, in terms of the Great Russian. Did you say? Great Russian chauvinism? Is that how?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right. So, they're not necessarily talking about these either small groups of skinhead white supremacists, nut jobs or something like that. Those are isolated things that could, that people recognize that, and they recognize them as nut jobs. But when they refer to a white supremacist society, they're talking about they're accusing America as being white supremacist society, and that's the problem. That's what people need to make that connection. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get right into that. Stalin gives away the he doesn't hide anything. We'll get right into that just a second about
he lets the cat out of the bag.
We'll expose. I mean, these guys, Lenin and Stalin, really kind of just laid it out for everybody, and that's why I'm surprised we're not going back to the original source and just looking at the words they use, because they're the exact same words most of the time, and they were a little more blunt with what they were doing. And so when we're talking about, great Russian chauvinism or white supremacy, that really applied to just the average person who was going about their business. And it applied to minorities too. Just like whiteness applies to, any minority who they think is being counter-revolutionary or not following the Socialist Party line. Same thing was back then. They had a word for it. I think it's pronounced Russo-Tiapsvo. But they would use that and say sometimes minorities are the worst, great Russian chauvinists.
Okay.
Just like any minority today who's you can see a black person who they think are being counter-revolutionary or whatever, that they'll throw that whiteness word around at them.
Sure, like in the classic example. Yeah, and the classic example is Larry Elder running for governor of California, and they're accusing him. They were accusing him of being the blackface of white supremacy, right? Because he supports America, supports the Constitution, supports American principles and values, right? So yeah, exactly what you're saying. So it's not even necessarily how they say they want to be, diversity and all this other stuff. It's really just the focus on whether or not you believe in the communist program. Okay.
Yep. And so now we're good. That was I just said that thing about the first task of the party was the fight against Great Russian chauvinism. We're going to back up just about 2 years before that and look at Stalin at the 10th Party Congress. And what he laid out there will sound very familiar to people. He just comes right out and says, part one, the capitalist system and national oppression. National, the word national there means minority ethnicity. So basically he's saying the capital system and minority oppression.
So they're referring to the different identity groups as, let's say, as I don't know if this is the right word, as nationalities or as
right
national. Go ahead.
Right, national. They in communism, in Marxism, Leninism, every ethnicity is considered its own nation.
Okay.
It might not be it might not have been that way before the communists got their paws on them, but the whole program of communism is to convert every ethnic group into a socialist nation.
Okay.
That has equal standing with all the other socialist nations.
Okay.
Equally culturally, equally. We'll get into those details.
All right, sure.
So the capitalist system and national oppression or minority oppression. He lays it out right there that it's capitalism. In the second section, the Soviet system and national freedom. Stalin starts out that speech by saying, whereas private property and capital inevitably disunite people, foment national strife, and intensify national oppression, collective property and labor just as inevitably unite people, strike at the root of national strife, and abolish national oppression. The existence of capitalism without national oppression is just as inconceivable as the existence of socialism without the liberation of the oppressed nations, without national freedom.
That's never existed before. But of course, he just makes it up, or he can just say it because they believe that that's the case. Okay.
Yeah. And he wraps that part of this sentence of this or paragraph of the speech up saying, hence the victory of the Soviets and the establishment of the proletarian dictatorship are a fundamental condition for abolishing national oppression, establishing national equality, and guaranteeing the rights of national minorities. Communism is the only way to get rid of inequality and have for minorities to be free.
Okay.
The only way.
Okay.
That's what he's saying there. Now, because we're in the time machine and we're 100 years in the past, at that time, the former Russian Empire, the new Soviet Russia, let's talk about the demographics, because the demographics of the population are about, at that time, according to the statistics Stalin gave in that speech, are 52% Great Russian and 48% minorities.
And I imagine that's including all of the minority groups combined. Is that
all 190-ish of them?
190. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of them were very small, like a smaller Native American tribe in the United States, and some were larger, like Ukrainians or Belarusians or Kazakhs. So there were bigger minorities that were like 20-some%, 10%, and then there were smaller ones also, but there were roughly 190.
Okay.
Now 52% majority, 48% minority. As of the last US 2020 census, we were 58% non-Hispanic white population, 40, 58, 42% minority. So you can see those numbers are getting
Relatively in the
kind of
same
close.
area. Sure.
It's the perfect time to launch the same kind of strategy.
Okay.
So at that time,
And that's also if you can, let's say, unite the various minority groups around a common cause or whatever you want to call it to anyway, right? I mean,
liberation from oppression. Yeah, and that's
liberation
what
from
in
oppression.
Stalin's
There you go.
words: liberation from national oppression through communism. So Stalin divided the population in two: the majority Great Russians and the minorities were grouped into a couple categories:
Okay.
backwards and indigenous peoples of communism. So your BIPOC acronym that came out of nowhere around 2000, late teens,
Yes.
it started being used all the time. I believe that was directly stolen from backwards and indigenous peoples from
Okay.
the Soviet era. All non-Russian minorities were considered indigenous. And
Yeah.
that was the first rhetoric of abuse from the Bolsheviks was if you could, claim that you were a minority and indigenous, you got special rights and privileges. Backwards minorities, which are a subset of the larger indigenous
Yep.
population, got extra funding and resources for development because they were culturally backwards due to quote unquote colonial oppression and slavery. Those were Stalin words. So that maps the backwards kind of maps right on to the black population in America, more or less, and indigenous meaning all minorities. Now,
Well,
not
just
just
let me just
Native
jump in real
Americans.
quick too, in terms of that also lays out the oppression hierarchy kind of matrix in terms of
Right.
within the oppressed groups who's more oppressed and who's less
Right.
oppressed within the oppressed groups. So
Just
it lays out
just
that
like that
hierarchy
BIPOC
structure,
acronym.
just
Yep.
like
Just
the
like that
BIPOC.
BIPOC acronym creates a
And,
hierarchy.
and also when that BIPOC came out, I remember, because before that, they were using POC, right? People of color, right? And then they broke off the black and indigenous to create that BIPOC to show that the black and indigenous have what do you want to call it? A special place within the minority groups, or a higher ranking in the minority groups in terms of oppression. So yeah, it's the same type of thing. They're just creating that hierarchy within their
Yep.
own identity groups.
And you only get that acronym when you translate it into English. Obviously, the Russian words don't start with those letters, but
Okay.
but the order stays the same. The B's try to claim more resources than the I's, then
Yes. Yes.
and they even indigenous applied to all the minorities in the Soviet Union. They use the word indigeneity in ethnic studies classes and stuff, and they use that to apply to all minorities, not just Native Americans, also in the same way.
I see.
So it really kind of mimics it, that that
Sure.
that same structure that was set
Okay.
up then.
Okay.
So where can we go from there? So that's when we start getting into DEI, diversity, in Russian. Um, that meant, according to Lenin and Stalin,
So I'm just going to stop you just for a
unity.
second.
Okay.
The diversity in Russian. I'm just every once in a while it just cuts out, and I just want to make sure that I don't want to
Oh
keep
yeah.
interrupting you, but at the same time, I don't want to miss what you're saying, or I don't want people listening to miss what you're saying, because
Okay.
it's important. And then go ahead.
Raznoobrazia.
Okay.
Raznoobrazia. I don't
Okay.
speak Russian natively, so I might mispronounce it a little bit, but that's basically how you say it.
Sure.
That means diversity, literally. And but to Lenin and Stalin, it meant the surest route to communism was through diversity of form, unity of socialist content through diversity of form, usually ethnic form, but sometimes gender or whatever. That was going to be the surest route to getting to communism. And
Okay.
so,
I'm having like, I've heard you mention that once before, or a couple. I've heard you mention that before, and I'm trying to like, I guess, square it away in my mind. So you said, say that one more time. Diversity of
unity of socialist content through diversity of form.
unity of
So,
content through diversity of form. All right. I guess you'll probably get into how that works. I don't want to jump ahead too far, but I'm just trying to understand that a little bit more. But go ahead. Yeah.
so yeah, everybody, the diversity of people, they had to adapt communism to their local conditions, their local culture a little bit, and then just completely gut it till the only thing left was a costume, and the only thoughts they were allowed to have were Bolshevik party line thoughts.
Okay. So
That,
they were broken down into so-called identity groups, or they already
right.
were, or whatever. Turn those identity groups into having the socialist mindset, and then kind of bring them all together in under the unity of socialism at that point. But it's, it's interesting. You said costume, and this is something that is like so, kind of, I guess, obvious, or to those of us have been paying attention, how so many organizations, institutions, whatever it is, have been hollowed out from the inside and flipped and turned into this, um, adopting this communism, this Marxism within their organizations, or whatever it is. But from the outside, it's still like, let's use schools, for example, or let's just,
Right.
you drive by his school, and it looks like it did 30, 40 years ago, or however long ago, that it still looks like a school, right? And people driving by have no idea what's going on, think that whatever's happening inside that school is basically the same type of stuff that happened when they were there, in terms of what they were learning, things like that. Obviously, technology has changed and all these other different things, but it's been hollowed out, and it's been repurposed to teach these kids this communist mindset. So anyway, I mean, I guess that's the way that I'm hearing what you're saying, in terms of these identity groups, or these nations type, so to speak. Is that am I
I mean,
on
it
track
was
with that?
exactly the same.
Okay.
Exactly the same. You got the concept down that all that's left is a costume, and that's a quote I'm using from a Belarusian
Okay.
refugee that was
Yeah. I
interviewed
mean,
in
that's a
in
good quote. Yes.
1950. But yeah, that's what's going on with institutions, with different ethnic groups, whatever. They're gutting it and just filling it with these revolutionary concepts.
Okay.
Now, this is also the reason why in schools and in other institutions they're talking about representation, and my teacher has to be of the same race as me, has to look like
Yes.
me, has to talk like me.
Yes.
And they affinity group people, they divide people up by
Correct.
race or whatever. That was going on also. The reason why your teacher had to look like you and talk like you is because that way you would think that communism was a native concept. It was
Okay.
part of your culture innately.
Oh, so it's not a foreign idea or something
Right.
being pushed
It's
and
not an
being jammed into
imperial,
you.
right.
Okay,
It's
okay.
not an imperial thing coming
It
down to
feels
colonize
more
you.
comfortable, let's put it
It's your
right.
own idea. It's your
Okay,
own desire. It's your own concept.
okay.
The communist idea. And that's what's going on right now. We're just reformulating every identity group into a socialist version of itself.
Okay. And
And they
then at
have to
some
divide people up to not give away the not give it away that it's an imperial kind of top down thing.
right.
They got to think that it's their own idea. Everyone in the Soviet Union was broken down into affinity groups, and not just large republics, but there were tens of thousands of ethnic territorial units, even the size of a farm at the smallest kind, a collective farm at the smallest. And,
Wow.
a district, maybe like the size of a county or something like that,
Okay,
was common, but tens of thousands of these made up of the 190 different ethnic groups, but
okay.
everybody had to be in their own homogenous territory. And
Okay.
this was decided that this was a prototype for a future world communist system. So
Alright.
when they're breaking people down like this is the original Bolshevik plan of how the world was going to be under communism. Yeah, so everybody's broken down now, and now comes the role of converting everyone to be a socialist version of their group identity. And the word equity, that there's no direct one word translation to equity in Russian. The word in Russian is fakticheske равенство, which is actual equality, if you were to
Okay.
translate it straight across. And that,
The same
Stalin,
concept though of kind of like
yeah, same,
redistributing resources to, make everyone equal or to give more to the, let's say, backwards and indigenous people to, okay.
yeah. Let's use Lenin's quote. Not only in an observance of the formal equality of nations, but even in an inequality of the oppressor nation.
Okay.
And so Stalin made this the second task of the party. The first task of the party was fighting the Russian privilege and great Russian chauvinism. The second task was this equity concept, or
Everyone's
actual
equal,
equality.
except some people are more
Right.
equal than others. Okay.
Right. Like what Lenin said, an inequality of the oppressor nation, the great Russians.
Yes.
And that's what you see with this sort of discrimination against white groups in the United States in the
Sure.
last decade or so, is just mimicking that straight from the Soviet Union. And
Okay.
like I said, that was the second task of the party that Lenin laid out. Um, the inequality of the oppressor. When Washington State first started using the word equity in its schools, and there's quite a few Russian and Ukrainians in Washington State, and so when they translated the word equity into Russian, guess how they translated it? There is obviously a word for that already in the Russian language from communism that was used all over the place,
Right.
And that they didn't translate equity into fakticheske равенство. They translated it into a different word that made it sound like,
Okay.
it was just
Okay.
like equality, like equal
Yes.
opportunity, not
Yes. Fairness.
fairness. That's actually what I think they used.
I'm
But
sure.
yeah, that is such a lie. To not even use the proper Russian Communist Party word for it is extreme. Um, and then inclusion, that word in the Russian language took off after from the revolution in the years after, just exponentially increased in frequency of use. But the policies called Korenizatsiya, indigenization, are probably is a better way to look at the inclusion policies. Um, And that kind of made native language use for each minority required, gave special resources for development to minorities, quotas in higher education, for example, and in jobs.
Would that correlate with the concept of like, I don't know if this, I don't, might not, it might not translate or whatever, but almost like a decolonization
That
of the various, let's say, minority groups or identity groups.
Right. That's exactly the word that was used, decolonization. So they usually use the Russian word for it. This is part of a big decolonization program.
Okay.
But really what's happening is they're being colonized with communist ideology.
100%. Gotcha.
But that's the actual word that was used for the program. Yeah.
Which is the same concept that's, behind the decolonization movements now, right? Like you said, it's more of a colonization of this communism. Okay.
But that's why you see native language, like language programs for minorities in schools. I think Washington has 42 different district programs for language use in its schools.
Wow.
I mean, everything from Hindi to Chinese to different native tribal languages. They're all using the native language to transform into communism, because native dialect has a high, in terms of human evolution, it's a trust factor correlation associated with same dialect use.
Yeah, I can see
So
that.
it tricks people. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And this whole time this is going on, that minorities are being transformed into having a communist version of themselves. You hear the same kind of things that are going on today. I'll give some examples. First of all, the majority culture is being denigrated constantly. When Harvard interviewed some Soviet refugees in 1950, this male army engineer said, before the war, the youth learned that there was nothing good in the history of Russia. So constantly denigrating the old history of the country.
Exactly what's happening.
Yeah. So somebody else said, the Russians, however, have more trouble than any of the others. This is on account of a law on Great Russian chauvinism, violation of which can be punished with up to 10 years of prison. A violation might take the form of a disparaging remark by a Russian about another nationality, or a member of that nationality implying inferiority of that particular race. Incidentally, other nationality groups could make remarks about races without fear of punishment. The law applied only to Russians.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go and explore that, the microaggression concept, and where that actually came from.
Okay.
Because that came about at exactly the same time as DEI and Soviet DEI and all these other concepts. They all came to get in one big package all at the same time, just like they are now. Let me see if I can get.
And the emphasis of impact over intent when somebody says something. That was something that I first kind of was like, what the heck's going on here? When I was on the school board, and I would, and people, somebody says something and someone got all bent out of shape, and it was like no big deal. It was just something that, whatever, and the person got all bent out of shape, and anyway, it was a whole big deal about how it was, how it impacted her was more important than what the person had no intent of offending anybody or whatever. But anyway, that was like, when you start seeing cracks in the whatever the heck's going on, you're like, okay, something's weird here. What is this about? Anyway, so that just reminded me of that.
I would give it to you. I'll tell you exactly where it came from. That first day of when the Soviet Union was officially founded, Lenin's notes. I'm going to read from them right here, and you'll know where this microaggression concept came from, because it was like the founding principle of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Here's Lenin. Offended nationals are not sensitive to anything so much as to the feeling of equality and the violation of this equality, if only through negligence or jest, to the violation of that equality by their proletarian comrades. This is why in the case it is better to overdo rather than underdo the concessions and leniency towards the national minorities.
Mm-hmm.
Even if only by the slightest crudity or injustice, he goes on to say, towards our non-Russian nationalities. Even if we are, he goes on to say, even if ourselves lapse, even if only in trifles,
There it is.
towards the oppressed nationalities. So, like you said, even if by jest, even if by accident, even
Yes.
even in trifles,
Yes.
he goes on and say, this is, only in trifles is a plain speak way of saying microaggression.
Exactly. Exactly. Wow, man.
There was one word, Article 123 of the Stalin Constitution actually forbid national animosity or whatever, and made it punishable. So it was official part of the Constitution that made these extreme punishments for microaggressions. An example that's commonly cited was the Ukrainian word for Jews, which was Zhid. And that word, you were supposed to use the Russian word ivri instead. But if you said the Ukrainian word, even though Ukrainians were forced to use the Ukrainian language, that word was 10 years, up to 10 years in the gulag for using that word. So just like, there was a teacher in outside of Spokane, Washington, who was canned from his teaching position because he he read the N-word in To Kill a Mockingbird, which was, the book was part of the curriculum, but he just said it out loud and he was gone. Same concept. There's a story in the Harvard Refugee Interview Project that was done in 1950 after World War II that a teacher described. This is a good example of a microaggression too. She used a 600-year-old proverb that said, an unexpected guest is worse than a Tatar. A Tatar is a Turkish ethnicity in Russia, but they showed up in Russia about 600 years unexpectedly. And so because this teacher had a guest coming over on short notice, she used that phrase, which was a common saying, and her other co-teachers heard her say that and turned her into the NKVD, the secret police, for investigation.
Okay.
And
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah. So that's the kind of things we got going on and where it comes from. It comes from Lenin and Stalin directly. And the punishment of it especially comes from Lenin and Stalin.
Okay.
The reason people don't realize what the reason for equity is and why, part of it's kind of socialist ideology, sure. But the other belief is that some minorities are so backwards that they can't properly engage in class warfare yet. And so that's why when you hear people start to speak of the material turn and that, people are saying things that start to sound like real communism now about, class warfare and that kind of thing. Especially with this guy running for mayor in New York, whatever, that similar things, you start to see that the party line is changing along this socialist, what they used to call it, the socialist, not socialist push, the socialist offensive. Okay. Yeah, that's what this equity thing is. Once equity is achieved, and it only takes about a decade, then every identity group will be expected to purge its counter-revolutionaries and engage in a socialist offensive.
All right. So what? Yeah. Right. Whatever people in the various identity groups are still holdouts or aren't playing along with the program, So that, yeah, that's kind of the next thing where it's headed, right? I mean, is that what
I,
you're
I
you're
can't read the future, but that's the
no, I
original.
understand, but that's what
That's
happened in
is this is the reason why we're, converting these people into socialist ideology and what they're going to be expected to do next. I guess I skipped ahead a little bit to the to the socialist offensive part, but
okay.
maybe we'll flesh out a little bit more what's going on in the schools.
Yeah,
Just
that'd be
just a
great.
little more depth before we get on to the dark things that are coming that I
Oh boy.
anticipate will be happening next.
Yeah, okay.
Um, what can it? Oh, this thing called the science of reading.
Oh yeah, good. I'm glad you brought that up.
I mean, obviously, we had some new National Assessment of Education Progress results came out today. Reading is at its lowest point since they've been doing the test, I believe. Yeah, reading scores are just in the gutter.
Right. You
And
see that
that I
reporting
actually
all the
have,
time.
I found some data from the Volga Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic about how their kids did from before the revolution. They're about 80 some percent literacy rate. And then it just, during the revolutionary years, it just plummeted down 30, somewhere around 30 some percent. And then slowly started coming back up towards World War II. But the program that was used was called LICBES, elimination, what was it called? Liquidation of illiteracy. And the purpose was to get rid of all the books, all the old books, all the old textbooks, and replace them with socialist content books.
Okay.
Even math instruction. In some of these quotes from the Harvard Refugee Interview Project, that they're saying that the math instruction, even arithmetic, was based on socialist ideology. So they were
So
indoctrinating kids through every topic, even math.
there's got to be some line from that through Paulo Freire's stuff and his generative themes and his things. I mean, it sounds very
Oh,
similar.
let's expand on that. So yeah, with the science of reading, the science meeting the science of Marxism, Leninism, and reading, the liquidation of illiteracy, that used phonics. Okay, that was like, we're going to use phonics as the basis of this program because it's an effective way to teach reading, same as what's going on today. But what they were reading is constant Bolshevik it was Bolshevik vocabulary back then. It was every reading passage that they would read would bring up questions for the teacher to discuss with the students about socialist agitation and propaganda and activism.
There it is.
And every passage, would lead to these controversial, topics that the teacher could discuss with the kids about needing social change and pushing
Okay.
for it with the kids. And
Right.
so none of these new communist people, Paulo Freire or critical theorists, none of them got an original idea, not an original
Okay.
bone in their body that you can't point back to the original people and say that's where they got it from. Even like Kendi, how
Yes.
he denounces neutrality, how
Oh,
that comes straight from Bukharin, the Bolshevik member of the Central Committee. He would say neutrality is just a cover for great Russian chauvinism,
so
right?
let's talk. I mean, I don't know how much you have on that, or if you can expand on that a little bit, because I think that's that is such an important point. That idea of no neutrality. Um,
Yeah.
is there? I mean, is that you're saying something that's basically kind of originated
At the 12th Party Congress, yeah. Neutrality, you couldn't be neutral because the dominant culture would just run things. Great Russian chauvinism would just run everything if you let it. So you
okay?
had to not be neutral. You had to be this pro-minority and pro-minority conversion to socialism to liberate them.
And I think that's something that so many people, like, they just do not, they don't understand, because whether they don't have the time or the interest yet, or they don't see the threat yet, or whatever, right? But this idea of, I mean, let's just use Kendi's thing with racism, like, when he says you're either you're either a racist or you are an anti-racist. There's no such thing as not, neutrality or not racist, right? And when he's saying, anti-racist, most people think that means against racism, and yeah, that's that, I'm against racism, so okay, I'm not racist, so I'm anti-racist. But they don't understand that the term anti-racism is kind of formed around the idea that America is itself is a racist country. Everything in America is racist. The institutions, the systems, that everything that has been built since the country was founded is racist. So if you're an anti-racist, they want to basically destroy America. And so I think that's something people really need to understand. If you think that you're, like, what do you want to call it? Like, I don't have time for politics, or I'm not interested in it, or I'm not, whatever, I'll vote now and then, or, but I'm an American, consider myself an American, consider myself a good person, whatever. But that view, they don't understand that let's say the anti-racists, or the basically the socialist ideology that's coming into our country considers you an enemy. They look at you an enemy. You are not neutral. They consider you a racist, because you are not actively participating in the disruption and the dismantling of American society, right? So anyway, I know most, a lot of people kind of see that now, but I think there's still a large group of people that haven't made that connection yet. So I just wanted to kind of focus on that for a couple minutes.
Yeah, that's fair to say. They don't this anti-neutrality, and Kendi even has a quote that about the average parent or whatever person's a race neutral society or whatever. He has a quote condemning that, how that's the most dangerous thing, just like the Bolsheviks did at the 12th Party Congress. It's okay. But no one ever makes that connection and puts the Bolsheviks' words, or Bukharin's words especially, in Kendi's mouth side by, put them side by side with each other. It's almost word for word the exact same thing.
Okay.
Especially the reporters, even independent reporters, they never mention any of this Soviet stuff when it's a Soviet program, all of it.
Yeah, I have to imagine. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, how many of them are even aware of all of this stuff? Like I said, you mentioned the Harvard project. Is it the Harvard Refugee Project?
Interview project. Yeah.
Interview project, right? So, like, I mean, that stuff is out there, and like you said, I mean, people could come across it and see it and report on it. But I think you just have that, a special skill set and a understanding that's able to, of course, with your background in education as well, to be able to look for these things and to recognize the direct correlations. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I really think you're one of the only people who have all the right, like I said, skill sets and background to really see this stuff and to raise the alarm like you have been. I mean, and once you see it, I mean, it's not like you're making this stuff up. I mean, you have all the receipts. You're showing the primary sources. You're showing it, and it's word for word. There's no dispute. It's not even close. So
Yeah.
anyway,
It's
yeah.
it's just kind of an accident of history, I think, that all these factors that kind of led me to see this. I don't know. I guess that's my purpose.
Well, hey
God's
man,
purpose
I
for
mean,
me
we're
was
lucky
to
to,
recognize all this stuff and get it out there as best I can.
for sure.
Um, but yeah, once you start, once you know where to look, and some of the best places are just the words of the Bolsheviks themselves, Lenin, Stalin, Bukharin, the rest of them, because you can make the connections very easily
Okay.
from their own words.
Okay.
And like the role, like Stalin gave the role of Russians it was their duty, it was their responsibility to fight Russian chauvinism harder than anybody, right? And so that's why with white people, when they separate them and affinity group them in their own, they don't have like a job pursuing their own interest or anything. Their job is to fight white supremacy culture the
Yes.
hardest, right?
Yes.
That's their
Yes.
duty. That's their only job. Um, and setting up this dialectical kind of race Marxism thing between minorities and majority, people
Yes.
understand it's a dialectic operating system. So the whole point of duping the minorities into going along with it is to set up a situation where you're actually discriminating and oppressing the majority so that they become a socialist nation in their own right.
Okay.
That's the plan. It's like you got to see how it works out. Um, so after the minorities kind of go through their phase of getting duped into communism, now we got to develop the majority. We have to rehabilitate
Oh,
white
yeah.
people in the United States because they were the most progressive of all. They dealt with all this discrimination. They financed all this stuff. They made sacrifices for the socialist conversion of minorities. Now they become what started out as equality went to inequality, the oppressor. So
Yes.
thesis, antithesis. Now the
Sure.
synthesis is first amongst equals.
Okay.
The job is to convert, or at least this is the original playbook, is to transform minorities into socialist, entities first, then transform the majority into a socialist entity. And because they have all this history and have such a, great cultural development, they're going to be the big brother, the first amongst equals of all the other groups.
Insane.
That's what happened in the Soviet Union. And not that there was, a lot of inequality or anything. Everybody was equally oppressed at that point. That's actually a quote from the Harvard Refugee Interview
Yes.
Project,
Yes.
is that they were equally oppressed now. But in the words of like Dugin, that Russian guy who has a
Yes.
lot of influence in what people are calling the woke right, he even talks about this thing of, the white culture should be the majority influence in the United States, and it should be, when the Soviet Union got past the early 30s, Stalin didn't want global communism; he wanted socialism in one country. And so this multipolarity concept that's kind of going around right now, they're
Yep.
they're quoting Stalin. They're literally quoting Stalin, but that's whose idea was to develop socialism in just America, and
Okay.
create
Oh, I
this
see what you're
country
saying.
where, yeah, minorities are all, everyone's kind of divided and they have their own culture, but it's all just a costume, and it's really just all socialism
Yes.
underneath.
Okay.
Um, that's kind of where I see things headed, and that's what's in the original playbook. Um, but these woke right ideas or people are calling them now, I mean, they certainly have a precedent because it's called the Great Retreat that happened in 1933-ish, I think it began. But people started rejecting the progressive education ideas a little bit and started going more towards traditional instruction. The church kind of had a role. Meritocracy,
Okay.
merit became, people started, that was the reaction to Soviet DI was merit. All the
Yes.
teachers had to take a test now to see if they were given a title called meritocratic teacher or whatever. That's also when the idea that we had to, in the 30s, you had to get rid of gifted programs. Like in Washington State, in the schools, they were using the NAACP Youth Council and some other groups of kids led by, communist adults to lobby for getting rid of gifted programs in Seattle and other places.
Oh, okay.
And that's the same exact thing as was going on in the Soviet Union under the slogan "Education for All." That whole program, led by Komsomols, which are, teenage kids, Leninist teenage kids. The "Education for All" slogan was to get rid of gifted programs and sort of lift up the most dysfunctional kids. That's what "Educate for All" meant, the most dysfunctional.
Yes.
And that's when they were actually trying to get equal outcomes for students in school. So this whole equity grading thing, it's all it's all connected.
100%. 100%. So where does the time machine go next?
We could go on for hours and hours and hours about every little detail about equity, DEI in the medical profession. Doctors were supposed to have a lot of contact with the masses. And so having a doctor that looked like you and talked like you, and part of their job, part of their training was Marxism Leninism. They spent Marxism Leninism as, you couldn't fail the Marxism Leninism classes and be a surgeon.
So I mean, along those lines, I recently
Yeah.
talked with Katie, and she kind of interviewed or spoke with this woman, Susanna, who went through partly went through the mental health, the counseling program, but she was kind of targeted as someone not, recognized and as someone who was not going to play along with the indoctrination, and was really, forced out of the program, or intimidated out of the program, or whatever, things were made difficult for her. Let's just put it that way, with the intention of pushing her out. So yeah, I recently spoke to them about it, and but it's the same, it's the same thing. They're pushing this stuff in pretty much in almost everything, and people are forced to either go along, or it's these kids coming out of high school who don't have the life experience to really understand what's being done to them. I mean, they're being, honestly, they're being, and I said this when I talked to Katie and Susanna, that they're being abused and, taken advantage of and manipulated and into this worldview, into socialism. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I just want to, that's exactly what you were just talking about.
But that's the problem. People talk about that a lot in the materials I've gone through, is that every career had that you were run out if you didn't follow the Marxist-Leninist party line.
I mean, it's all over the place. It's all over the place already.
But yeah, even Lenin at the founding of the Soviet Union in his notes was talking about the Commissariat of Education and the Commissariat of Psychology, how the lines of them were blurred, that they shouldn't really be separate entities. I think when you mentioned counseling and someone being kicked out for not being a socialist,
oh yeah, like I said, I think the professors kind of recognized her early on, Well, number one, she was an adult learner, going back to school to get a master's degree, and she's in classes with mostly students in their early 20s and stuff like that. And then and listen, these professors got to know as soon as an adult walks in their classroom, they know that they haven't gone through this indoctrination. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
And probably within the first minute of them saying something, the adult student talking, they can identify them as to whether or not they're going to be a problem, and then the pressure is going to start to build from there. So anyway, yeah. So
Oh,
what do
man.
you think, Steve? What's the best way to handle it? I mean, is there a few more things? I know you said certainly you could go on, for hours and stuff like that. And I mean, is there a few more things you want to touch base on, while we're here now? And of course, we can always catch up again.
Yeah. The thing is that when you have the playbook, you have what happens next. You
Yes.
have what on the original version, and you're always looking to see. Obviously the original version mapped out what just took place over the last 10 years, almost. Especially when you look at the details and get more into the quotes from people who were alive at that time. I mean, it's unmistakable what just took place.
Okay.
And people have yet to make that connection. And I don't know if there's a stigma with socialism and communism where you see it, for me, is as soon as you see stuff that Lenin and Stalin put into policy here, that's enough for me to drop everything and fight against it with every fiber of my being until it's gone.
Yes.
But people are just not having that reaction. And I have to say, in the original version, that's also, there was some pushback at some point, but when I read quotes from parents back then, they were just kind of, just let them pretend everything's all right. Let's just pretend this is normal to some extent.
Yeah. And I guess to some extent, I mean, I guess they had no other experience with this system to, I guess, maybe to compare to or to draw on. I imagine, I don't, it would seem that we've seen this play out over the 20th century in various places, and what it's ended up, it's like people should be more aware of the results of what's going on, and more concerned about it. But I don't think, certainly, our schools don't really teach that history. So, we're kind of almost just unaware of it, as anyone else.
That's why I say that teachers have the authority to, some states have made some rules or whatever, but I say you got the authority to teach DEI, do it. Explain the original version and what's coming next.
That's smart. That's
I say you already have the authority to teach Soviet history. You don't need a law asking, telling you have the permission to teach communist history. These DEI laws in some schools that's in the curriculum, you have the authority to teach Soviet communism,
right.
And what it really is. And, I guess a way to look at the next coming years is the socialist offensive and kind of class warfare and taxes kind of brewing on the horizon in the original playbook. But also we have to look at technology. The technology of the day, the AI stuff. Back then, the machine tractor station was called the lever of collectivization. That was the new technology, was the tractor. And so the slogans were that the machine tractor station was the lever of collectivization. we have to look at this new technology that's emerged in the present as the lever of collectivization. I mean, I heard from parents in the Seattle area, which is very well that the tech
I'm
companies
sorry,
are
say it one more time, Steve. The new technology as the lever of what now?
collectivization.
Oh, okay, okay, yes,
Forced
yes.
collectivization. Yeah. Um, the I heard from a parent in Bellevue, which is a tech-centric area of Washington State, that their kid had come home saying that the communist revolution was going to proceed, but there wouldn't be as many deaths because it was going to be facilitated by AI.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh yeah,
I think
that's a
looking
major.
at new technology as the lever of collectivization, um, you know, back in the 30s when collectivization was going on, people would quote, the Revelations Bible verse that would talk about, without the mark of the beast, you can't buy or sell, and there's no money, there you can't buy anything with money anymore.
Right.
So using digital currencies and that kind of thing is a concern, taking
Big
away
time.
money and who can use it. These are all kind of issues I see on the horizon that are in the original playbook,
Okay.
So
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see that stuff coming.
with the ESG and the stakeholder capitalism kind of stuff, people forget that the Soviet Union, when it was founded, was started on something called New Economic Policy, and that was capitalism kind of with state control. Their whole plan was to transition to a more socialist accounting kind of methods and control what was being produced to be more socially useful, what was being produced under more socialist ideology, but also to create some wealth because the country was in ruin after the revolution, and you couldn't have class warfare without getting some people rich first. So we kind of see what's going on with capitalism in the United States now, taking parallels to the new economic policy.
Yeah, with the stock market, just continuing to rise and stuff like that, and like everyday people are just continuing to get squeezed, continuing to get squeezed, and yeah, it's definitely going to be causing
And
those tensions.
I mean, even today I do construction, so I had some Simpson hurricane ties. I was nailing up on a building, and we were building, and I just checked out their website when I was eating lunch, and it has social impact. I mean, your joist hangers and your
Can't
hurricane
get away
straps
from
and
it.
stuff
Cannot get away from
their
it.
social impact statement on it.
Yes. Well, listen, man. I mean, obviously, it'd be great to talk again sometime on any, to go into depth on any more of the other topics or whatever you'd like to talk to. But this was excellent. Like I said before, I mean, I think I think the country is lucky to have you who has all of this like we talked about before, your background, your your understanding of what what happened then, and also your understanding of the terms and the language of what's being used now, and to be able to make those connections. Most people don't even necessarily even understand the meanings of the terms that are happening now, let alone have any clue about what happened you know in the Soviet Union. So yeah, dude, I mean, I it's great, it's great to talk to you, and I appreciate all the information that you're putting out. Where can people find you in terms of I know obviously you're on Twitter, and you have the YouTube channel, stuff like that. I'll put that stuff in the description. But if you just want to maybe let people know where they can find you now while we're talking.
Yeah, that's basically where you can find me. Is Stephen Welliver. You can spell my name on
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I'll put it in the description. Yeah.
Welliever. Yeah. on Twitter, and I recently started trying to throw together some short YouTube videos on some of these terminology and its history.
Yeah, dude, they're really
short
good, man,
video.
because I think, you know, like you said, they're short topics, and you're hitting them, you know, and you're explaining them as you go through, and it's a good format, and they're a good length to you know, kind of absorb these ideas a little bit at a time, because I mean, you know, it took me a while to start making the connections, even, you know, even as you're trying to explain them, because, you know, over the past however amount of time, when I'm trying to pay attention to what you're saying and make the connections, like I was hearing you and I was seeing it. But you know, it's the same concepts. The terminology is a little bit different, and to understand, just like you said, like, you know, at the beginning here, and we were talking about, you know, great Russian chauvinism versus, you know, kind of like the white privilege or the white supremacy, you know, though, just to even make those concepts, and you can see as soon as you make those connections, it's like, boom, of course, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same playbook as you said. So cool, Steve. This was great. We'll definitely do it again sometime. And thanks a lot.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.